Word of the orbital station raid spread through the underground networks faster than Thakanaar had anticipated. Within hours of their return to the Bone Valley, encrypted messages were flowing between exile camps and smuggler havens across the system. The story grew with each telling, a daring infiltration that had humiliated Imperial security and stolen classified data worth millions of credits. But for Thakanaar, the raid's success was overshadowed by the contents of the stolen files. As he studied the evidence in Balgotha's private chambers, a picture emerged of corruption and conspiracy that reached far beyond Morgotha's personal ambitions. The Pale Orc had not simply murdered his way to power, he had systematically dismantled the traditional clan structure and replaced it with a network of cronies and collaborators. "Look at this," he said, highlighting a series of financial transfers on the main display. "Morgoth has been selling clan mining rights to Imperial corporations at below-market prices. He's essentially turned the Iron Spine into a subsidiary of the Empire." Bolgoth studied the data with growing anger. "The fool is destroying everything your father built. No wonder the other clans have been quiet. They're too busy profiting from sweetheart deals to care about tradition." The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic betrayal. Morgoth had used the mining revenues to purchase loyalty from key clan members while secretly negotiating agreements that would eventually transfer ownership of Khazrak's mineral resources to Imperial control. It was a long-term strategy designed to make him wealthy beyond imagination while selling his people into economic slavery. "We need to present this to the clan assemblies," Thakanaar said. "Once the warriors see the truth, they'll turn against Morgoth and his collaborators." "It's not that simple," Bolgoth replied grimly. "Half the clan leadership is implicated in these files. They'll fight to suppress the evidence rather than face justice for their crimes." The Scrap King was right, of course. Simply revealing Morgotha's treachery wouldn't be enough to restore Thakanaar to his rightful place. The conspiracy had taken root too deeply in the clan's power structure, creating a web of mutual dependence that would be difficult to break. They needed a more direct approach, one that would appeal to the basic instincts of the Orc warriors who formed the clan's backbone. "The right of challenge," Thakanaar said suddenly. "Ancient law gives any clan member the right to challenge the leadership if they can prove corruption or betrayal." Balgotha's cybernetic eye brightened with interest. "A formal duel for control of the clan. But Morgoth won't accept a challenge from an exile, especially one marked as a kinslayer. He will if the challenge comes from within the clan itself." Thakanaar began pacing as the plan took shape in his mind. "There are still loyal warriors in the Iron Spine, members who served my father faithfully and never believed the accusations against me. If one of them issued the challenge and I served as their champion, it could work," Bolgoth agreed slowly. "But you'd need irrefutable proof of Morgotha's guilt, and the challenger would have to be someone with enough standing to demand the clan's attention." The solution came to Thakanaar in a flash of inspiration. Grakthol the Iron-Handed, his father's former weapons master, had been notably absent from the ceremony that led to the explosion. The grizzled veteran had been conducting training exercises in the outer settlements, returning only after Thakanaar's exile to find his beloved clan in the hands of a usurper. "Grakthol never accepted Morgotha's authority," Thakanaar explained. "He's been quietly building support among the younger warriors, those who remember the old ways and question the new order. If we can get this evidence to him, then you'll have your formal challenge," Bolgoth finished. "But presenting the evidence will be dangerous. Morgoth has spies throughout the clan, and any attempt to contact Grakthol will be detected." They spent the next several hours planning the operation, drawing on the valley's network of smugglers and information brokers to identify the safest approach. The solution lay in exploiting the clan's own traditions, the upcoming Festival of Shattered Chains, which commemorated the Orc liberation from their original slave masters. During the celebration, warriors from across the clan would gather at the ancient ceremonial grounds, providing cover for clandestine meetings. The festival was held in the Crimson Peaks, a mountain range that contained some of Khazrak's oldest settlements. The ceremonial grounds were carved directly into the living rock, creating natural amphitheaters where thousands of warriors could gather to hear speeches and witness ritual combats. More importantly, the peak's unique mineral composition interfered with electronic surveillance, making it nearly impossible for Morgatha's agents to monitor private conversations. Thakanear would attend the festival in disguise, using cosmetic modifications and neuroprogramming to alter his appearance beyond recognition. A contact within the clan, one of Grakthal's most trusted subordinates, would arrange a private meeting where the evidence could be transferred safely. Remember, Bolgoth warned as they made final preparations. Once you trigger the challenge, there's no going back. Morgoth will use every dirty trick at his disposal to maintain power, and he won't hesitate to break ancient laws if it serves his purposes. I know, Thakanear replied grimly. But my father deserves justice, and my people deserve the truth. The journey to the Crimson Peaks took 3 days through treacherous mountain passes and unstable terrain. Thakanear traveled alone, using a modified civilian transport to avoid attracting attention from clan patrols. His appearance had been extensively altered, his tusks filed down, his skin chemically lightened, and his neural implants reprogrammed to change his voice patterns and mannerisms. The festival was already in full swing when he arrived, with thousands of warriors gathered to celebrate their heritage and honor fallen heroes. The air rang with traditional war chants and the clash of ceremonial weapons as mock battles played out in the various arenas. Food vendors sold roasted meat and fermented spirits, while artisans displayed their finest weapons and armor for potential buyers. Navigating through the crowds, Thakanear felt a deep pang of nostalgia for the simpler times of his youth. He had attended this festival every year as a child, marveling at the skill of veteran warriors and dreaming of the day he would lead the clan to victory. Now he was a stranger in his own homeland, forced to skulk in shadows while a traitor sat on his father's throne. The meeting with Grakthal's contact was arranged for midnight at the Shrine of Fallen Heroes, a sacred grove where the names of dead warriors were carved into massive stone pillars. The location was perfect for their purposes, isolated enough to prevent eavesdropping, but public enough to avoid suspicion. As he made his way through the darkened grove, Thakanear felt the weight of generations watching him. The names on the pillars told the story of his people's struggles and triumphs, each one representing a life given in service to the clan's honor. His father's name was here, carved in fresh stone that still gleamed with ceremonial oils. "You came," said a voice from the shadows, and Thakanear turned to see a familiar figure emerge from behind one of the larger monuments. Kralek the Swift had been one of his closest friends during their youth, a warrior whose loyalty to the clan was matched only by his skill with blade and bow. Seeing him now, scarred by years of combat, and bearing the insignia of a clan lieutenant, Thakanear felt a surge of hope that perhaps not all had been lost. "The evidence you sent through the channels," Kralek said without preamble. "Grakthal has examined it thoroughly. The corruption runs deeper than we imagined. Then he'll issue the challenge? Tomorrow, during the closing ceremonies. But Morgoth has been expecting something like this. He's surrounded himself with bodyguards and hired mercenaries. Even if the challenge is accepted, the combat won't be fair." Thakanear had anticipated this development. Morgotha's cowardice was legendary, and he would never risk his position in an honest duel if he could avoid it. "Leave that to me," he said, transferring the complete evidence files to Kralek's portable storage device. "Just make sure Grakthal knows that I'll be ready to serve as his champion when the time comes." The next morning brought the festival's climactic ceremonies, with the entire clan leadership assembled on the great platform that jutted out from the mountain's face. Morgoth sat on a portable throne that was a crude imitation of the clan's traditional seat of power, his pale features twisted into a mask of false benevolence, as he accepted the ritual tributes from various subordinate tribes. Thakanear watched from the crowd as Grakthal approached the platform, his ancient armor gleaming in the morning sunlight. The weapons master had served the clan for over 50 years, earning respect through countless battles and unwavering loyalty to the traditional ways. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "I call upon the ancient laws," Grakthal declared, his voice echoing across the assembled multitude. "I challenge the leadership of this clan for crimes against our people and betrayal of sacred trust." The crowd fell silent, thousands of warriors holding their breath as they witnessed a moment that would define their future. Morgotha's face went ashen, but he managed to maintain his composure as he rose from his throne. "These are serious accusations, old friend," the pale orc replied, his voice carrying across the arena through amplified speakers. "Do you have evidence to support such claims?" Grachthal's response was to activate a holographic projector that displayed the stolen financial records for all to see. The evidence was overwhelming: detailed documentation of secret deals, bribery, and the systematic looting of clan resources. Gasps of outrage echoed through the crowd as the scope of Morgoth's betrayal became clear. "The law is clear," Grachthal continued. "Trial by combat, with champions if necessary. I call upon Thakanear, son of Grakanear, rightful heir to the Iron Spine throne, to serve as my representative in this matter." This was the moment Thakanear had been waiting for. He stepped forward from the crowd, his disguise falling away as he activated a personal shield generator and drew the plasma sword that had belonged to his father. The weapon's blade ignited with brilliant blue energy, casting dancing shadows across the ceremonial platform. "I accept the challenge," he declared, his voice carrying clearly across the silent multitude. "Let justice be served and truth be revealed." Morgoth's composure finally cracked, his pale features twisting with rage and fear. "Kinslayer!" he screamed. "You dare show your face here after murdering your own father?" "The only murderer here is you," Thakanear replied calmly. "The evidence speaks for itself. You poisoned the quenching solution, killed my father and brother, and framed me for your crimes. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it." The crowd's murmur was growing louder, warriors discussing the evidence among themselves and reaching their own conclusions. Morgoth could see his support eroding by the moment, but he still had one card left to play. "Very well," he snarled. "If you want trial by combat, you'll have it. But I choose my own champion, Skor the Destroyer, fresh from the gladiator pits of Kessel Prime." A massive figure emerged from behind the throne, easily the largest orc Thakanear had ever seen. Skor stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body a mountain of muscle and cybernetic enhancements that had been optimized for pure destruction. Scars covered every visible inch of his skin, and his eyes held the vacant stare of someone whose humanity had been carved away by years of brutal combat. "To the death," Morgoth added with malicious glee. "As is traditional for matters of clan succession." Thakanear nodded grimly. He had expected treachery, but facing a professional killer in single combat was still a daunting prospect. Skor's reputation was legendary throughout the gladiator circuits: hundreds of victories, no defeats, and a fighting style that combined brute strength with surprising tactical sophistication. As the two champions faced each other in the center of the arena, Thakanear felt the weight of his people's future resting on his shoulders. This was more than a duel for clan leadership. It was a battle for the soul of the Iron Spine, a chance to reclaim the honor that Morgoth had systematically destroyed. The crowd fell silent as Grachthal raised his hand to signal the beginning of combat. In the distance, Khazrak's twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the ancient ceremonial grounds where the fate of an entire civilization would be decided by the strength of a single warrior's arm. The ceremonial arena fell silent as the two champions circled each other, each warrior seeking an advantage in the opening moments of what promised to be a battle for the ages. Thakanear moved with the fluid grace of classical orc combat training, his father's plasma sword held in perfect guard position, while his enhanced reflexes analyzed every detail of his opponent's stance and movement. Skor the Destroyer was a study in controlled violence, his massive frame deceptively agile as he wielded a pair of vibroaxes that hummed with barely contained energy. The gladiator's cybernetic enhancements were clearly visible beneath his scarred skin: neuroprocessors that would accelerate his reaction times, muscle amplifiers that could deliver crushing blows, and armor plating that had been surgically implanted beneath key areas of his torso. "You fight well for a kinslayer," Skor rumbled, his voice artificially modulated by vocal implants. "But the arena has taught me that honor is a luxury that dead warriors cannot afford." "Then you'll learn otherwise today," Thakanear replied, adjusting his grip on the plasma sword as he prepared for the inevitable assault. The attack came with shocking suddenness, Score launching himself forward with hydraulically enhanced legs that propelled his massive bulk across the arena like a missile. His twin axes swept down in devastating arcs designed to crush any defense through sheer overwhelming force. Thakanear's response was pure instinct, years of training compressed into a fraction of a second as he rolled aside and brought his plasma blade up in a defensive parry. The weapons met with a thunderous crash that sent shockwaves through the arena floor, the vibroaxe's molecular disruptor fields clashing against coherent plasma in a display of raw energy that drew gasps from the watching crowd. For a moment, the two warriors were locked together, their weapons grinding against each other as each sought to gain leverage. Score's brute strength was overwhelming, but Thakanear's superior technique allowed him to redirect the gladiator's momentum and slip away from the bind before the larger warrior could bring his full power to bear. "First blood to either," Grakthul announced as the fighters separated and began circling again. "Both champions fight with honor." The next exchange was even more violent, Score's axes weaving complex patterns that filled the air with humming death while Thakanear danced between the strikes with desperate precision. The plasma sword was faster and more maneuverable than the heavy axes, but a single solid hit from either vibro weapon would end the fight instantly. Thakanear found his rhythm in the third exchange, his blade work becoming a flowing symphony of attack and defense as he began to exploit the tiny gaps in Score's technique. The gladiator was supremely skilled, but his style had been shaped by the controlled environment of the arena where showmanship was often as important as lethality. Here, in the ancient ceremonial grounds where his ancestors had fought for survival against impossible odds, Thakanear felt the spirits of generations of warriors guiding his movements. A perfectly timed riposte opened a thin line across Score's left shoulder, drawing the first blood of the contest. The wound was superficial, but it served notice that the exile's blade could penetrate even the gladiator's enhanced defenses. "You have some skill," Score admitted, flexing his injured shoulder to test the damage. "But skill alone will not save you when the killing begins in earnest." The gladiator's next assault was a masterpiece of controlled fury, his axes moving in perfect synchronization as he pressed forward with relentless aggression. Thakanear found himself giving ground, his parries becoming increasingly desperate as Score's superior strength began to tell. The plasma sword's energy field flickered under the constant impacts, and he could feel his own stamina beginning to flag under the sustained pressure. It was then that he remembered his father's words from long ago. "Strength without wisdom is mere brutality, but wisdom without strength is impotence." A true warrior must master both, using each to amplify the other. Instead of continuing to fight Score's strength with strength, Thakanear shifted tactics, using the gladiator's own momentum against him. When the next overhead blow descended like a falling mountain, he stepped inside the arc and struck at Score's wrist with surgical precision. The plasma blade severed neural connections and damaged the cybernetic actuators that controlled the gladiator's left hand, causing the vibroaxe to tumble from suddenly nerveless fingers. Score's roar of pain and rage echoed across the arena as he realized the magnitude of his injury. The damaged hand hung useless at his side, forcing him to rely on his remaining weapon while Thakanear pressed his advantage with renewed vigor. "Impossible!" Morgoth snarled from his throne, his pale features twisted with disbelief. "Score has never been seriously wounded in combat. There's a first time for everything." Balgotha's voice carried clearly from the crowd where the Scrap King had positioned himself to watch the duel. "Your champion fights well, but he lacks the fire that burns in the heart of a righteous warrior." The battle's momentum had shifted decisively in Thakanear's favor, but Score was far from defeated. Fighting with the desperate fury of a cornered beast, the gladiator launched a series of increasingly wild attacks that filled the arena with devastating arcs of molecular disruption. His single remaining axe became a whirlwind of death, forcing Thakanear to use every ounce of his skill to avoid being cut down. But desperation bred carelessness, and Score's increasingly reckless assaults left him open to counterattack. When the gladiator overextended himself in a particularly ambitious strike, Thakanear was ready with a response that had been taught to him by the greatest weapons master in clan history. The plasma sword's blade swept up in a perfect rising cut that penetrated Score's abdominal armor and carved deep into his torso. The gladiator's expression shifted from rage to surprise as he looked down at the glowing wound that had opened him from hip to shoulder. "How?" he gasped, his remaining axe falling from nerveless fingers as his enhanced physiology began shutting down non-essential systems in a desperate attempt to preserve life. "Because I fight for something greater than myself," Thakanear replied, supporting the dying warrior as he collapsed to his knees. "You fought for credits and glory, but I fight for justice and the honor of my people." Score's final words were barely audible above the roar of the crowd. "Then, you have earned your victory." As the gladiator's body went limp, Thakanear gently lowered him to the arena floor and closed his sightless eyes. There was no shame in dying in honorable combat, and even hired killers deserved respect in death. "The challenge is resolved." Grakthal's voice boomed across the arena. "By ancient law and sacred tradition, Thakanear, son of Grakanear, is hereby recognized as the rightful leader of the Iron Spine clan." The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming, thousands of warriors raising their weapons in salute, while their voices joined in the traditional victory chant. Many had harbored doubts about Thakanear's guilt, and the evidence presented by Grakthal had confirmed their suspicions about Morgotha's treachery. But the Pale Orc was not finished. As Thakanear stood triumphant in the center of the arena, Morgoth drew a concealed plasma pistol and took careful aim at the new clan leader's back. "If I cannot rule the Iron Spine," he screamed above the crowd's noise, "then no one will." The shot that rang out was not from Morgotha's weapon, but from Vexiore's sniper rifle positioned high in the arena's upper reaches. The bullet took the traitor in the center of his forehead, ending his threat permanently, and ensuring that justice was finally served. As Morgotha's body crumpled to the platform, a shocked silence fell over the assembled multitude. The treacherous Orc's death had been so sudden and unexpected that many warriors were still processing what they had witnessed. "The usurper is dead," Thakanear announced, his voice carrying clearly across the arena. "His reign of corruption and betrayal ends here and now. But we will not repeat his mistakes. There will be no purges, no revenge killings, no persecution of those who served him out of fear or ignorance. The Iron Spine clan will rebuild itself on foundations of honor and justice, not on the graves of our enemies." It was a message that resonated deeply with warriors who had grown tired of Morgotha's paranoid authoritarianism. The new clan leader was offering not just victory, but genuine reconciliation and a return to the traditional values that had made their people strong. "What of those who collaborated with the traitor?" called out one of the younger warriors. "Will they face no consequences for their crimes?" "They will face judgment," Thakanear replied. "But that judgment will be fair and proportionate to their actual guilt. Those who were coerced or threatened will be forgiven. Those who profited from corruption will make restitution. And those who actively participated in murder and treason will answer for their crimes." Over the next several hours, the complex process of transitioning power began in earnest. Morgotha's key collaborators were arrested and detained pending formal trials, while those who had served him out of necessity were offered amnesty in exchange for their cooperation in rebuilding the clan's institutions. The evidence stolen from the orbital station proved invaluable in identifying the full extent of the corruption network. Imperial mining contracts were cancelled, stolen resources were recovered, and new leadership was appointed to positions that had been compromised by Morgotha's cronies. Most importantly, Thakanear honored his agreement with Bolgoth by formally abolishing the exile system and establishing the Bone Valley as a protectorate of the Iron Spine clan. Those who had been cast out for minor infractions or political disagreements were invited to return home, while the valley itself would serve as a refuge for those seeking to escape oppression elsewhere in the sector. As the twin suns set behind the crimson peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Thakanear stood alone on the ceremonial platform where his father had been murdered and his own destiny had been forged. The weight of leadership was already settling on his shoulders, but it was a burden he was prepared to bear. Somewhere in the darkness, he could feel the spirits of his ancestors watching approvingly. Justice had been served, honor had been restored, and the Iron Spine clan would rise again stronger than ever before. 6 months after the Festival of Shattered Chains, the the transformation of the Iron Spine clan was already becoming apparent to observers throughout the Outer Rim. The massive mining complexes that honeycombed Kazrak's surface hummed with renewed activity, as workers labored to fulfill contracts negotiated on fair terms rather than through corruption and intimidation. Thakanaar stood in the restored Great Forge, watching as master artisans worked to complete a memorial to his father and the other victims of Morgotha's treachery. The monument would serve not just as a reminder of past tragedy, but as a promise that such betrayals would never again be allowed to poison the clan's foundations. The quarterly production reports, Zargoth announced as he entered the forge carrying a portable data pad. The young analyst had been promoted to Chief Information Officer, responsible for ensuring that the clan's business dealings remained transparent and accountable to the membership. Output is up 17% from last year, and we've completed renegotiation of all the mining contracts that Morgoth had compromised. And the Valley integration? Thakanaar asked, reviewing the financial summaries with professional interest. Proceeding smoothly. Balgotha's people have brought specialized skills that complement our traditional expertise perfectly. The new cybernetic enhancement facilities are already producing equipment superior to anything available on the black market. The partnership with the Bone Valley had proven even more beneficial than Thakanaar had anticipated. The Outcast's innovative approaches to technology and unconventional solutions to complex problems had energized the clan's research and development efforts. Meanwhile, the clan's resources and organizational structure had provided the valley's inhabitants with opportunities for advancement that had been denied to them for decades. War Chief, came Vexiore's voice over the communication system, using Thakanaar's formal title with its traditional respect. We have incoming ships on long-range sensors. Configuration suggests a diplomatic mission from the Stormbreak clan. The arrival of envoys from other clans had become increasingly common as word of the Iron Spine's transformation spread throughout the sector. Some came seeking trade agreements, others hoping to learn from the clan's innovative approaches to governance and resource management. A few had even inquired about establishing formal alliances against the growing imperial pressure on independent worlds. Have them escorted to the main conference chamber, Thakanaar instructed. And ask Rakthal to join us. His experience with interclan negotiations will be valuable. As he made his way through the restored corridors of the clan complex, Thakanaar reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when his father died. The paranoid atmosphere of Morgotha's rule had been replaced by an open culture that encouraged innovation and honest debate. The rigid hierarchies that had stifled younger warriors had given way to merit-based advancement systems that rewarded competence and dedication. Most importantly, the clan had regained its sense of purpose and identity. They were no longer merely miners extracting wealth for imperial corporations, but a proud people forging their own destiny among the stars. The war barges that emerged from their shipyards were marvels of engineering that combined traditional Orc craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology. Their warriors were recruited not just from the Iron Spine bloodlines, but from the best fighters throughout the Outer Rim who sought to serve a cause greater than themselves. The conference chamber was filled with representatives from nearly a dozen different clans, their varied armor and weapons creating a colorful display of martial tradition. At their head stood War Chief Khalida of the Stormbreak, a formidable female warrior whose reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by her fierce independence. Thakanaar of the Iron Spine. She greeted him with formal courtesy. Your clan's recent changes have attracted considerable attention throughout the sector. Changes for the better, I hope. Thakanaar replied as he took his place at the head of the conference table. We've learned that strength comes not from oppression, but from unity of purpose and clarity of vision. Indeed. Which brings me to the reason for this visit. Khalida activated a holographic display that showed the current political situation throughout the Outer Rim. Red indicators marked worlds that had fallen under direct imperial control, while yellow zones showed systems where increasing pressure was being applied to independent governments. The Empire is moving to consolidate its hold on this entire sector. Individual clans, no matter how powerful, will not be able to resist the coming storm. Thakanaar studied the display with growing concern. The pattern was clear. The Empire was systematically isolating and overwhelming independent worlds, using economic pressure and military force to expand its sphere of influence. Within a few years, every inhabited system in the Outer Rim would be under Imperial control unless coordinated resistance could be organized. "You're proposing a formal alliance," he said, recognizing the implications of Khalid's presentation. "More than that. I'm proposing a confederation of free clans, united in common cause against Imperial expansion. Your clan's innovations in technology and governance could serve as a model for others, while our combined military strength would make any Imperial assault prohibitively costly." It was an ambitious proposal, one that would require careful negotiation and delicate balancing of competing interests. But the alternative, watching helplessly as the Empire gradually absorbed every independent world, was even less appealing. "The Iron Spine will consider your proposal seriously," Thakanear replied after consulting briefly with Grakthul and his other advisors. "But any alliance must be based on mutual respect and shared principles. We will not trade Imperial tyranny for clan-based authoritarianism." "Agreed," Khalid said with obvious satisfaction. "The Confederation would be a voluntary association of equals, not a hierarchy dominated by the strongest member." The negotiations that followed lasted for 3 days, working out the complex details of military cooperation, resource sharing, and joint governance that would be necessary to make the alliance function effectively. In the end, the Khazrak Accords established a framework for cooperation that preserved each clan's independence while creating mechanisms for coordinated action against external threats. As the various delegations prepared to depart, carrying copies of the agreement back to their respective homeworlds for ratification, Thakanear felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His father's dream of a united Orc civilization was finally becoming reality, built not on conquest and domination but on voluntary cooperation and shared values. Standing once again on the observation deck where he had watched the twin suns set on the night of his victory, Thakanear gazed out at the stars that beckoned with infinite possibilities. Somewhere among those distant lights, Imperial fleets were preparing for war, confident in their technological superiority and overwhelming numbers. They would discover, perhaps too late, that they faced not a collection of squabbling tribes, but a unified people fighting for their freedom and their future. The Orcs of the Outer Rim had rediscovered their strength, and they would not go quietly into the dark. The age of the Empire was ending, and the age of the free clans was about to begin.